Essentially, what I'm talking about is I'm talking about what the Greeks developed, the Romans, stole and kind of made their own, right? And that whole classical period from, pre-BC to 300 AD when the Roman Empire was really growing, right? There's a guy named Vitruvius. The only book that we have from the classical world on architecture is a guy named Vitruvius who wrote a book called The 10 Books of Architecture. You don't have to read it because there's a lot of different stuff in there, but there's a number of ideas that came out of that book that they discovered in the Renaissance. So now 1400, they rediscover all these great classical works. That's from Plato and Cicero and all these great writers are rediscovered. And so it's a rebirth, right? It's called the Renaissance. Starts in Italy. It kind of moves out into France later as the architects and designers start getting hired by the French courts. Inigo Jones in England is the first guy to take classicism back to England in 1573. But realize, I'm showing you how slow that path is. It takes 120 years for it to even get to England. But these are ideas and things that come to us later, right? So as America is starting to develop in the 1720s and 1730s, there are some other things, that's where that tradition comes from. Here's the 5 orders of architecture I was talking about. Tuscan, Doric, Ionic, Corinthian, and Composite. And so this is what was developed in the Renaissance, and what you'll notice is that this order, the Tuscan order, is very different from the Composite order. Okay, it's more ornamented, right? There's more detail. This is a thicker, heavier thing. This is a thinner, lighter deal, and so very few decorations and details there. A lot of dentils and shapes there. They all have a personality. They all have a difference. And the idea was that, if you were going to build an armory, right, you would do it out of a very masculine, strong order. If you're going to build a theater or a palace, you might do it out of a very elevated, high order, right? So it's not just, oh, look at the different orders. There are actually purpose and meaning behind each one. Vitruvius spoke about the gender of those things. And he said the Tuscan order is a masculine order, okay? Well, what does that mean? And the Ionic order was a feminine order. The Tuscan order has a relationship of 1 to 7, okay? Well, what does that mean? Well, what they're talking about is the diameter at the base of the column, okay? And then how many tall that is. So if say this is 12, then 7 of those things tall would be the diameter. And you'll see that if you look at, you can't see it, but this is in your packet, you'll see it says base 1/2 D, okay? D is the diameter at the base of the column. And so all of these sizes for everything in that order is based off the D, the diameter. Now, where does that come from? So if I measured my foot, it's 11 inches long. I am 76 inches tall, okay? I'm 1 inch from being like perfect. So I'm not quite 1 to 7, but it was based on an ideal proportion in the human body. So my hands, my head, my ears, my legs, everything is proportional, right? And there's a system for, sizing it up, drawing the human figure. The same thing was true in architecture, right? And so go home tonight, measure your foot, see how tall you are, see how close you can get to being perfect. But the feminine order or the Ionic order is like a 1 to 8, okay, or 1 to 9. And you'll see these things vary a little bit. And so there is a proportional relationship, and that's why when this order is broken out, okay, and all of these different parts are sized, it's sized off of D, which the diameter, so there's a unifying whole, right? So everything's proportionate. There's a system there. And even better, there's a human scale to it. And so that's why we walk into some of these spaces and go, I really like it here, but I don't know why, okay? So those details are done. I explained earlier, all of the moldings that we use in our houses today are based off this classical system. So the height of our chair rail, okay, is based on the top of the pedestal. The picture rail, right? The picture rail you'll see in rooms like that, that's the top of the tinea, the top of the architrave. And so I want you guys to get good at understanding terms like entablature, frieze, bed mold, dentil, where all those things go, because most people don't get it. Most people screw it up. And so once you understand those things, you begin to build beautiful things. Back to this door header, right? Here's our frieze. Here's our architrave, okay? Architrave is just door casing, okay? Here's our frieze. This is called a pulvinated frieze because it moves out. And then you've got a bed mold, and in between the bed mold is a dentil. You got a corona and then a cimation, okay? So that's exactly what we've got here. The other thing you need to remember as you design moldings, okay, is this is your palette sheet, okay? These are the shapes you use. You don't need any other shapes, okay? And if you've sat there and go, wonder what I should do, it kind of just wanders off, right? There's actually purpose and meaning behind these moldings. And so we've got plane surfaces, concave, convex, and compound, okay? So we'll talk more about this, but there is a rationale, right, with how this all comes together. And the thing that makes it wonderful is that you can be in a 50-foot tall space or a 15-foot tall space, and you still feel comfortable in that space. You don't feel overwhelmed because there's a human scale, because it's all based on these proportions, right? There is, hierarchy, okay? Now, hierarchy means that if you're doing a house, every room doesn't get every molding, right? You've got bathrooms and closets that shouldn't be as elevated as the main formal hall, okay, if you're doing a classical space. And that's what this is showing from Robert Adams' book. This is the exact same space, okay? Door, two windows, doors, two windows, door, two windows. But we've elevated it by adding more moldings and more details. In this one, you just have a base and a crown. In this one, they've added a chair rail, they've elevated the door, and they've added a little bit more cornice, and then they've put the pilasters in there, right? So there's a hierarchy to this and how they put this together. There's also an idea called punctuation, which is probably the most important thing for you to remember when you're thinking about door casings, window casings, okay? It is never a little 2-inch molding, okay? It is almost always something bigger. So what you have in this classical system is you'll notice that there is a visual phenomenon, okay? A geometric symbol that you'll see on here, and then an arithmetic ratio, okay? Everybody heard of the golden ratio? Okay, so that's that 5:3, right? And you'll see as this space is laid out, and if you guys can get good at laying out your spaces like this, magic, okay? Now, why, okay? Well, the idea of punctuation, okay, means that for the size, the width of an opening should get framed or punctuated with a certain size. And so in the Georgian area is about 1 to 5, and the federal area is about 1 to 7, okay? So that means is you have a 30-inch opening, you have a 5-inch casing, right? So, right, there's a arithmetic ratio there and again, this is in the classical system, so we'll do the math later, but sometimes these casings can end up being 8 inches wide, and you're like, I'm never going to put an 8-inch wide casing in a house. Okay, well, you don't have to, but the realization that it's not a 2-inch casing, that you're trying to find that balance here, and most people that study and look at this classical stuff don't want you to do the math, okay? In other words, I mathematically figured out every single, that's not really the magic that happens, but there is a realization, hopefully, on your part that it is bigger than most people are putting in. The differentiation, right? See what they've done here is that the height of this door, okay, is that differentiated, that 3 to 5 ratio, right? And that even the relationship of this to the crown, there's another one, and they break it out and they'll show that even in the dental and stuff like that, they have this differentiation. But you have punctuation over the whole room in the chair rail, and then from the chair rail to the entablature, right? So realize that all these parts and pieces are coming together, right? And they're all speaking to one another and working. And then just the sad part of it is that these were things that were understood pre-1940. if you ever wondered why pre-1940 houses look better than post-1940 houses, it's because after World War II, you have production building, you have cheap and fast building, and we kind of forgot these rules. And this is in a 1926 builder's catalog. It's a Odell's carpentry manual built for carpenters, right? That even carpenters at that time understood the Greek versus the Roman orders, the differentiation and sizing. So a lost art that hopefully we'll start getting back. Now, I think the best example of this, I hesitate to ask this question. Who's been in the New York Public Library? Okay, there we go, much better. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful place, right? And so Carey and Hastings, they were the architects, 1895. But if you've walked through this space and seen what they've done, look at the order, the composition, the beauty here. We've got double pilasters here. You've got an entablature that wraps this space, this beautiful vaulted arch. We're talking about writing and reading, starting with the 10 Commandments, you know, over here with the monks, and I don't know whether that's Gutenberg or not, but you know, celebrating, right, the book and writing. And then, of course, the reading room is just one of the more magnificent spaces in America. And so, but realize too that there's a composition here, that there's a order. There's a reason why we're like, fall in love with that space. Notice on the outside, where my thing is, that there is a main pier, column here that supports this upper entablature, and then there's an inner column supporting this arch, and that marches around that room and in that space, and there's repetition, there's pattern, there's rhythm, there's harmony, there's almost musical, lyrical kind of beauty in this space that we love. And so, you know, then you break down the smaller elements, right? There's the framing and the order that's taking place there, and then when you have just openings like this with the arch and there's tons of ornamentation in here, but it doesn't feel too ornamented, right? Why is that? Why can't we do good ornament like this anymore? And they understood this balance of, you know, this is a cathedral for learning, right? And so it is rightly so celebrated. The ornamentation is appropriate, and we feel wonderful in that space. As opposed to this. Today, we run into spaces that are weird, okay? And you know, this is like the open warehouse in a McMansion, right? You have the bedroom right off the bathroom. You know, what are we celebrating here? What are we highlighting? What's the hierarchy in this space, right? There is no crown molding, right? We're elevating the tub and the bed frame, right? And so, I hope we all recognize that this is terrible, right? And so, but it's hard, and I've gotten calls from people say, they'll watch my videos on YouTube, and they'll go, I want the classical moldings, because when you understand the classical moldings, they just make so much sense. And they'll go, I want it in my house. I go, send me a picture, and it'll be a room like this. And it is very difficult to introduce order, to introduce, you know, rationality, okay, in a space like this, because it's irrational. And so they're hard, okay? It was actually fun trying to pick all these pictures out. But the Corinthian column, okay, is the classic, if you've, maybe we've all done it, if you put a Corinthian column in your house, then that's kind of like, ooh, I wish I hadn't done that. Because the Corinthian column tends to be the sticker, okay, that we put on a thing if someone wants something very elaborate or ornamented, okay? And yet this Corinthian column, okay, one is a bad Corinthian column. Notice that it's a straight shot, it's a tube, okay? Columns have emphasis, they have movement in them. They're bigger at the base than they are at the neck. And then that little molding at the bottom, you know, there should be a double attic base and everything else. It's just an ignorance to the classical orders. It's an ignorance to that thing. And manufacturers give us these things, and we end up using them like stickers on these jobs so that we can elevate a space when we don't really know how to elevate a space. So we're going to learn from the past. A lot of sheetrock arches in McMansions, right? Why do they do that? Well, they're trying to create interest. They don't know how to use moldings. They don't know how to elevate a space. And you walk into these spaces and you're like, where do I go? What am I supposed to do? Whereas you walk into a traditional space and you're like, it's very clear, you know, this element is more important than this element. I should go here because there's hierarchy there, or whatever the thing is, right? And so these spaces become very confusing. By the way, just quick quiz. This is advertised as a what style house? That's right, we don't know. It's Mediterranean. And you're like, really? No. So again, confusion, lack of a story, lack of a narrative, right, that they don't carry without the house. And then people hear the terms, and this other thing we do, I'll have people say, you know, I have a stained grade library, okay? Or I'll have a cherry library, as if those words will elevate it and make you think more about the stuff. Because there aren't many name brand things that they can brag about with their friends at the cocktail party. I got a Sub-Zero Wolf maybe, but I got stained grade library. Okay, maybe, no, wrong. Here's stained grade trim, right, that just looks silly. You're just like you've think brown stripes around your house. I'm not holding back, am I?